Virgin Galactic had its last VSS Unity flight on Saturday, and it might be its last flight ever. A lot of us are worried about that. A lot of us are wondering if they are going to come back after their long break. So I do want to go through the numbers with you today. My name is Laura Forsick. I'm the Executive Director of Astrolytical, which is a space consulting firm, and we help businesses, government entities, and nonprofits to grow in space. And I do want to talk about the financials here. So I've got pulled up their latest results, their latest filings with the SEC for the first quarter of this year, 2024. So first off, Virgin Galactic has been slow to begin, right? The company is almost 20 years old. It started right after the Ansari X Prize win of Spaceship One, and that was in 2024. I'm sorry, that was in 2004. So the company started essentially right after that. So it's coming up on 20 years. When Richard Branson started the company, he anticipated that flights would begin, actually 2008 is the earliest reference that I saw, that they would start flying commercially 2008, then that slipped to like 2010, 2011, like it just kept slipping until finally they started flying first their own crew members, and then the first flight with Richard Branson on board in July of 2021. But even their cadence has been super slow. So to give you some idea, I've been part of the suborbital researchers community since 2010 maybe. And the idea was that suborbital spaceflight would increase the flight cadence so much that suborbital spaceflight would be almost practice or an ability to launch things very quickly, very frequently, and iterate very frequently compared to orbital spaceflight. But the reality has been that suborbital spaceflight has been slow, both with Virgin Galactic and with Blue Origin. And those are the only two spaceflight providers that do suborbital spaceflight at this time with humans on board. There's sounding rockets and things like that, but we're just talking about human suborbital spaceflight at this time. Now, Virgin Galactic is different from Blue Origin in that Virgin Galactic is only relying on suborbital spaceflight. It does not have the plans that Blue Origin has with New Glenn and Orbital Reef and a lot of the other things that Blue Origin's working on, the Blue Moon and other things. So it has one business case, and that is to fly humans to suborbital space. And for reference, the United States government has said that 50 miles, approximately 80 kilometers, is the definition of space. So Virgin Galactic goes a little above 80 kilometers. So if you're one of those von Karman, 100 kilometers or nothing, or orbit or nothing, then you don't even believe these people go to space. But according to the United States, according to the FAA, Virgin Galactic's customers and pilots are going to space. They are not going for very long. It's just they take this flight. It's an air launch system. So they have a mothership that launches the rocket from the air. They go up for something like 4 minutes, 3.5 minutes, and then they land back down in the runway in New Mexico. That's where they launch from, and that's where they land. And the idea was that they would be able to do this around the world. So there are agreements in place with other spaceports, other essentially airports that can be called spaceports around the world for whenever Virgin Galactic was ready for that. And we all thought, at least we all hoped, that Virgin Galactic would get there eventually. Now, I had been skeptical about this company for several years now. I've been rooting for them on one hand, but also thinking that they're not going to make it on the other hand for, maybe 4 or 5 years now. It's one of these things where I want suborbital spaceflight to happen. I want Virgin Galactic to succeed, but at the same time, I don't see it happening with the numbers. So the numbers, I do want to go over some of these financial numbers. Again, I have the first quarter report pulled up as of March 31st of this year. They have $867 million in cash equivalents, and marketable securities. So $867 million. So to give you an idea of their burn rate here, in 2023 and 2022, they burned through about $500 million each of those years. So if they continue along that same general path of how much money they are spending per year, that gives them about a year and a half, maybe 2 years if they stretch it, worth of runway if they do not raise any additional funding and if they do not have significant revenue. So let's talk about revenue. In the first quarter, they had a revenue of $2 million, and they're predicting a revenue of $3.5 million for the second quarter, which those results we'll probably hear about in July. To give you another comparison, in 2023, the entire year, they had $7 million in revenue. And it's because they have been so slow to operate, right? They would increase their revenue if they could increase their flight rate and increase the number of passengers that they fly. So they made a decision last year that they were going to retire VSS Unity in favor of developing its Delta class vehicles. Now the Delta vehicles, they say, are going to be easier to produce. They're going to, faster to produce, and they're going to have 50% more of the passengers. Right now passengers are at 4, so they're going to have up to 6 passengers, which I look at those numbers, I'm like, wow, that's not much of an increase at all. That's kind of embarrassingly small increase, actually. When I wrote my book, which is right here, came out in 2022, Becoming Off-Worldly, I interviewed several people who had flown to space, and one of them, we were going through the numbers, right? He's not only a private astronaut, but he also he has started a few space companies, and he was of the opinion that I agree that in order for Virgin Galactic or suborbital spaceflight in general to really be cost effective, you need to bring those numbers up from like taxi numbers. You get into a taxi, maybe you can cram in 4 to bus. An order of magnitude higher. You need to make these things a bus rather than a taxi, because then you get that economies of scale happening where you can have more people, more paying passengers per flight. Think about airliners. They cram in hundreds of people in those bigger flights, and that is much more cost effective than a small little commuter plane or private jet. Private jets aren't meant to be cost effective. They're meant to be comfortable. And so they can fly small numbers of people in those private jets or those really tiny jets. But if you're talking about making real money, then you need to be flying, if not tens of people, hundreds of people at once. That's really where Virgin Galactic needs to be going. And maybe that is where they're going longer term, if they can survive longer term. And that's the key here. They want the Delta class vehicles to be testing in 2025 and operational in 2026. And that is unrealistically optimistic. They have been so slow to do any kind of development. And in general, spaceflight development takes a lot longer than you think it's going to. There's always delays. There's always setbacks. And for safety reasons, because these are carrying humans on board, they really need to take their time to make sure that these flights are safe. Because all you need is one crash with a customer, and that could plummet the entire company. It's not like the government, where the government, will go through hearings, testimonies in Congress and that kind of thing, and then eventually come back. It's not like that with a private company. A private company really needs to rely on the market trusting its vehicles if they're going to put actual people on board, especially wealthy individuals. But not only that, is they're predicting 2 Delta vehicles flying in 2026, working their way up to 3 at once. And that is not happening. If you believe that there's 2 Delta vehicles that are going to be flying in 2026, 3 times a week, they're estimating, like, I've got a bridge to sell you. Do people still use that phrase? I don't know. But basically, you're extremely gullible if you believe that they are going to be flying 2 Delta vehicles, brand new vehicles, 3 times a week, in 2026. That's just not happening. They might get there eventually. We hope they will, but it's just not happening that quickly. I'd be very surprised if they got even one flying once a month, let alone 3 times a week or however frequently they want. And these are the numbers that they're doing to figure out how they can survive. So these are the numbers that they're putting out in their official SEC filing to say, here's what we're predicting for the future at X number of dollars. So they currently are selling tickets, or I don't think they're selling tickets at the moment. The last time they were selling tickets, it was $800,000 per ticket, but they have sold a significant number, somewhere around 600,000, maybe 700,000 at a smaller price point. They initially started selling tickets at $200,000. So those early adapters that bought, like 15, 20 years ago at $200,000, they've been waiting. They've been waiting a long time. And so then they raised the price to $450K and now $800K. So they have a lot of customers that have bought at a lower price point. So for them even to do the math, saying we need to fly 125 times, 6 passengers, $800K, it's not happening. It's just not happening. The math doesn't make sense because it's unrealistic numbers, unrealistic projections. And so for them to be saying these are the numbers that need to make sense for us financially to survive, like, it just tells me that they don't think the company's going to survive. That's what it's telling me. It's telling me that whoever wrote these filings does not think the company's going to survive. Like, obviously they need to be legal in their filings and like actually do something realistic in their minds to put their word behind it. But as an analyst, like this is not happening. This is just not happening. Now, they could raise more money, which is what they've been doing, right? Sir Richard Branson last year, he said at the end of the year last year that he said that he's not putting any more additional money into it. What's his quote here? I actually pulled it up, but I have a pop-up that's blocking it. He said, Virgin Galactic has got $1 billion, or nearly, he told the Times, on which Times? The Financial Times. It should, I believe, have sufficient funds to do its job on its own. So that tells me that Sir Richard Branson has cut off the company, which is not terribly surprising because he let Virgin Orbit, the spin-off company, go bankrupt. So I believe that he's willing to let Virgin Galactic go bankrupt. If you remember back in the early days of the pandemic, when airlines were really hurting because people weren't flying, people weren't traveling as much, like Virgin Group really was hurting. The Virgin airline, things weren't going so well. So Richard Branson financially, as a person, was really hurting back then. He hopefully is doing better now. I mean, things are really recovered right now in terms of like airlines and all of that. So hopefully, I haven't looked into like the Virgin Group as a whole, but just at the end of last year, he's like saying that's done with Virgin Galactic. I'm not putting any more money in. $1 billion is a lot of money for initial funding, and 20 years is a long time. So if we've got Richard Branson cutting off the company, what signal does that give to any other investors who might be thinking about putting money into Virgin Galactic, which is a publicly traded company? So you could go buy stock right now if you wanted to. I'm not going to, but if you wanted to, you could go buy low and see what happens to your money. There's one more thing here that is a big question mark, and that is the mothership, Eve. So Eve, let me pull up that number. Eve was commissioned in 2008. And this thing has been flying since 2008, these missions. And this is the mothership that carries the, it used to be Unity, and now it's going to be the Delta class spaceship. So you might know it as White Knight 2. That's the name, that the general name, and then Eve is the specific name. So Eve has been flying for, a long time. And now they want to not only keep on flying Eve, but they want to increase the flight rate. So increasing it to 3 times a week, or is it 6 times a week? I don't know. But that is, to me, is also unrealistic. There are, of course, airlines that fly planes many, many times a week. It's not unheard of, but they have a routine, a refurbishment process. They've got many planes. They can take some planes off the docket and like refurbish them longer if they need to. Airlines have these things down. Virgin Galactic doesn't have this down. And they're working with a slightly older plane here, 2008, that has in the past gone through some structural strains. And so is it going to be safe to fly Eve? Is Eve going to have the ability to be sustainable with any kind of increased cadence of flight rate? And I don't know about that either. And I haven't heard that they're going to be replacing Eve. In fact, I think I heard the opposite, that they're going to be keeping Eve flying so that they can save money. And speaking of saving money, so I don't know if they're going to be burning $500,000 a year in 2024 like they did in 2022 and 2023. But I know they just opened up another factory, an integration factory for its Delta vehicles, integration and testing in California. They just opened that up a couple of months ago. So that tells me that they're not actually going to be slowing down much on the spending side. They're actually probably going to be increasing spending so they can get those vehicles operational as quickly as possible. My prediction is that they're going to burn through that $867 million pretty darn quickly, like maybe a year and a half. So without additional funding coming in and without additional, huge amounts of revenue, like $7 million of revenue for 2023, that's nothing when you're burning through $500 million. So I don't see how these numbers work. Oh, there's one more thing that I forgot to mention, and that is Boeing is suing Virgin Galactic. As of this year, there was a lawsuit, misappropriation of trade secrets, and something else I can't remember off the top of my head. Virgin Galactic countersued Boeing, but then dropped their countersuit. So we don't know what's going to happen with that lawsuit. So if all of a sudden Virgin Galactic needs to pay Boeing a certain amount of money, I don't know what that's going to do to their cash reserves. So lots of things here going against Virgin Galactic. I'm not saying that they're not going to make it. I'm saying it's going to be very difficult for them to make it. But space companies have been like Phoenix before, where they come back from the ashes. So we're just going to have to see how this plays out. Let me know in the comments below whether or not you think Virgin Galactic is going to make it and whether you would fly on a Virgin Galactic vehicle.